What if I told you that the most impressive lap of the 2026 Miami Grand Prix was not just an exhibition of talent, but the definitive proof that Lewis Hamilton was right about a hidden problem that Ferrari had been hiding for weeks? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because while everyone was watching Charles Leclerc's brutal time, no one realized what was really important. A difference of almost a second. A technical failure that changed everything. And a confession that left the paddock in complete silence. How is it possible that the same car that dominated on the track was losing up to 9/10 without anyone understanding it? Stay, because what Hamilton revealed not only explains that lap, it explains Ferrari's true level in 2026. The 2026 Miami Grand Prix did not start as just another race. It started as a total unknown for Ferrari. They arrived after weeks of doubts, internal analysis, contradictory sensations where the car seemed to have potential, but never showed it clearly. And in the midst of that context, with the pressure piling up on the team, Charles Leclerc appeared to completely change the narrative in a matter of minutes. From the first session, the Monegasque made it clear that something had changed. It wasn't just a matter of being fast, it was the way the car responded. Precise in technical curves, stable in changes of direction, solid in fast areas. And lap after lap, while the rest tried to understand the circuit, Leclerc built something much more important, a reference that was impossible to ignore. His time not only placed him at the top, it did so with a clear difference compared to names like Max Verstappen, which automatically set off all the alarms in the paddock. Ferrari, that team that had been generating doubts, suddenly seemed to have the car to beat. But this is where the story starts to become much more interesting, because while Leclerc was shining on the track, on the other side of the garage the situation was completely different. Lewis Hamilton was not experiencing the same weekend. His performance did not reflect that apparent improvement, and that generated an internal disconnection that would soon come to light. What for many was simply a difference in styles or adaptation, in reality hid something much deeper. And Ferrari was not only fighting against its rivals, it was fighting against itself. Because the SF26, that same car that Leclerc pushed to the limit with impressive naturalness, continued to show inconsistent behavior depending on the conditions. On long runs, the pace seemed solid. In certain areas, the car performed exactly as engineers expected. But at other times, especially when the absolute maximum had to be extracted in a single turn, limitations appeared that no one could fully explain. It was as if the car had two completely different faces. Leclerc sensed it. I felt it in the handling, in the response of the tire, in how the car changed its behavior when it approached the limit. Therefore, even after a dominant performance, his statements were not one of total euphoria, but one of caution. I knew that the performance was there, but I also knew that it was not constant. And that in Formula One is a warning sign. Meanwhile, in silence, inside the box, Hamilton and his team analyzed data that did not add up. Top speeds below expectations. Differences that cannot be justified only by configuration or downforce. And the most worrying thing, a loss of performance that was not punctual, but cumulative. All this builds the true scenario of Act 1. A Ferrari that seems to be reborn thanks to the return of Leclerc, but that, at the same time, hides a critical weakness. A team that excites, but that still does not fully understand its own car. And two pilots living completely opposite realities within the same structure. Because while one demonstrates how far SF26 can go, the other is about to reveal why they still can't exploit it 100%. And the most shocking thing of all is that this revelation was not going to stay within the team. It was going to completely change the perception of Ferrari in 2026. The turning point of the weekend at the 2026 Miami Grand Prix did not occur on the track. It occurred when Lewis Hamilton decided to speak. Until that moment, everything revolved around the return of Charles Leclerc, the potential of the SF26, and the feeling that Ferrari had finally hit the key. But within minutes, that narrative was completely shattered. Because Hamilton not only spoke, he explained something that no one outside the team had managed to understand. The loss of between 8 and 9/10 in top speed. And not as a hypothesis, not as an excuse, but as a real problem identified after weeks of internal analysis. A failure that was not in the engine, as many might think, but in a combination of technical factors that, together, were destroying the car's performance on a straight line. This is where everything changes. Because if Ferrari was losing almost a second in certain conditions, then Leclerc's lap is no longer just impressive. It becomes something much bigger. It becomes an anomaly. How is it possible that a car with such a structural disadvantage is capable of leading a session with authority? How can he make a difference against rivals like Max Verstappen if, in theory, he is so limited? The answer is uncomfortable for Ferrari, but fascinating from the outside. The car does work, but only in a very specific window. This explains absolutely everything we had seen so far. It explains why Leclerc could dominate in free practice, where there is more margin, more adaptation, more control of the context. And it also explains why, when the critical moment arrives in qualifying, the perfect lap, the absolute limit of performance, does not always appear. Because at that point, any deficit, especially in top speed, becomes devastating. And here comes another key element that Hamilton hints at. Ferrari did not fully understand the origin of the problem for weeks. That is, it's not just that the car had a limitation, it's that the team was operating without knowing exactly why. That's the most serious thing. Because in Formula One, not understanding your car means not being able to develop it correctly, not being able to optimize settings, not being able to react to changes on the circuit. It means, in essence, competing blindly. Meanwhile, Leclerc was doing everything possible to sustain that performance, adapting, modifying his style, finding time where the car didn't give it naturally. But even he made it clear, the problem with the soft tire in qualifying was no coincidence. It was a direct consequence of that irregular behavior of the SF26. And this is where Act 2 reaches its most critical point, because we are no longer talking about a good return, not even a good weekend. We are talking about a Ferrari that has the potential to fight at the top, but is limited by a technical problem that costs it almost a second per lap. A Ferrari where a driver is bringing out magic, and the other is exposing reality. The tension within the team is evident, although is not explicitly stated. Two visions, two experiences, two ways of understanding the same car. But both converge on an uncomfortable truth. Ferrari is not where it could be. And the most dangerous thing of all is this: if they solve that problem, everything changes. If they don't, this return of Leclerc will be just a mirage. And then we reach the moment where everything stops being theory and becomes a real warning for the entire grid. Because what happened after Lewis Hamilton's statements was not just another analysis of the weekend at the 2026 Miami Grand Prix. It was the beginning of a new narrative around Ferrari, a much more dangerous one. Now everyone knows the truth. Now everyone knows that the SF26, that car that seemed inconsistent, is actually limited by a specific problem. Measurable, solvable, and that completely changes the board. Because while Ferrari previously generated doubts, now it generates something much more disturbing: uncertainty about its true ceiling. And this is where the return of Charles Leclerc takes on a totally different meaning. It's no longer just a grand tour. It is a preview of what can happen. Because if with a loss of up to 9/10 the car was able to dominate a session, what happens when that loss disappears? What happens when Ferrari manages to align all the variables, fully understand the car, and exploit that potential without restrictions? The answer is as clear as it is uncomfortable for its rivals. Ferrari could become the team to beat. And this is not an exaggeration. It is a logical consequence of everything we have seen. Because in Formula One, finding hidden performance is worth more than any upgrade. And Ferrari, thanks to what Hamilton revealed, knows exactly where it is wasting time. They are no longer searching blindly. Now they have an address. But here comes the final twist, the most important of all. Having the answer does not mean having the solution. Because these types of problems, those that affect multiple car systems, are not corrected overnight. They require time, development, on-track correlation, and technical decisions that can even compromise other areas of performance. That is to say, Ferrari is in a race against time and against its own limits. Meanwhile, the rest of the teams have already taken note. Max Verstappen and company know that Ferrari they saw in Miami is not an illusion. It is a threat in the making. One that, if completed, can change the balance of power in 2026. And within the team, the situation is just as delicate. Because now there are two truths coexisting at the same time. That of Leclerc, which shows that the car can win, and Hamilton's, which shows why he still doesn't do it. And when those two realities collide, that is where the future of a team is defined. Miami wasn't just a race. It was a revelation, the return that excites, and the confession that changes everything. Because Ferrari can no longer hide. Now you know what you have. And the rest, too. The conclusion of everything that happened at the 2026 Miami Grand Prix is not simply that Ferrari has taken a step forward. It is that, for the first time in a long time, its true situation has been completely exposed. Because Charles Leclerc's return was not just a flash of talent, nor an isolated moment. It was proof that the SF26 has real, tangible potential, capable of putting anyone on the grid on the ropes. But at the same time, Lewis Hamilton's words made it clear that this potential is incomplete, limited by errors that the team itself was unable to identify for weeks. And that is the key to everything. Ferrari is not failing due to lack of speed, is failing due to lack of understanding. What we saw in Miami is exactly that, a car capable of dominating, and at the same time incapable of sustaining that dominance. A structure that has the tools to win, but still cannot assemble them correctly. And in the middle of all this, two pilots who perfectly represent that contrast. One extracting the maximum possible, and the other pointing out the cracks that prevent going further. But the most important thing is not what Ferrari was in Miami. It is what it can become. Because now they have something they didn't have before, clarity. They know they are losing up to 9/10. They know it's not the engine. They know it is a specific technical problem. And in Formula One, identifying the problem is the first step to changing everything. The big question is no longer whether Ferrari can be competitive. The real question is when it will be. Because if they manage to correct that deficit, if they manage to stabilize the car's behavior and extend that performance window that is so fragile today, what we saw from Leclerc will no longer be an exception. It will become the norm. And that is the final message that Miami 2026 leaves. Ferrari has already shown its best version, but it has also revealed why it still does not dominate. The balance between those two realities will define your season. And right now, the entire paddock knows it. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.